All right. Thank you for joining us today for the Solar 101 webinar. I'm Tanya Hamilton with Urban Haven Group, and we are here today with Brett Bauman and Drake Hankinson from Solar YYC, and they are here to talk to us about most things solar, because there is a part two later on in this series. So Drake, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Tanya. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Just one housekeeping item, I should say, before we get started. But if you do have any questions, we kindly ask that you please hold on to them until the end of the presentation, and then we'll be more than happy to walk through everything with you. Additionally, if you're watching this as a recording, should you have any questions, please do reach out to me at Drake, that's DRAKE, at solaryyc.ca, solaryyc.ca. All right, thank you. So first off, my name's Drake Hankinson, and I manage partnerships here at Solar YYC. And I'm joined by my colleague, Brett. Brett, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Brett Bauman. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing here over at Solar YYC. Me and Drake have been working together for about the last year or so, kind of breaching new partnerships and doing a lot of these educational events to help different professionals understand how solar interacts with their industry. So we're looking forward to getting into some of the high-level regulations and economic pieces today to help shine some light on that.
Perfect. Thanks, Brett. So why don't we start from the beginning? How does solar work here in Alberta from a regulatory and economic perspective? So understanding the Alberta landscape for solar energy production as it relates to homeowners, the first and probably most important stakeholder that kind of governs everything in our industry is the Alberta Utilities Commission. Now, the Alberta Utilities Commission oversees all of the privatized wire service providers that operate here in Alberta. Unlike many other provinces, power generation is essentially a privatized game here. That's where you see Fortis, ENMAX, EPCOR, companies like that are providing energy to homeowners and businesses in whichever region that they operate in. In terms of the Alberta Utilities Commission, what they have mandated when it relates to solar systems that are tied to the grid is that homeowners need to be able to have solar systems that will at least cover their energy production or energy consumption rather, based on the prior year's usage. So when we as a company are working with homeowners interested in solar, one of the first and most critical things that we're going to look at is how much energy did you use in the past year? And based on that energy usage, a homeowner can then begin to look at potentially adding a solar system to their home as a way to offset their energy bills. Now, when we're looking at financing options, probably the biggest option available as it relates to homeowners is the SEEP program. So SEEP programs are essentially sponsored by local municipalities. Here you can see a map showing all of the different municipalities that are participating in SEEP financing currently across Alberta. And what this essentially provides is homeowners the opportunity to get a solar system funded by their municipality directly, and then have their repayment terms be tied, instead of it being a cash payment, to their property tax. With these payments, homeowners can receive up to $50,000 for home upgrades as it relates to energy efficiency. There is an interest rate that's charged, which is about 3.25%. And while this is saying over 20 years, it is negotiable with the homeowner. They can do a 10, 15, or 20-year term, depending on their preferred or their individual preferences. Again, these payments are made via property tax, so the homeowner would see their property tax go up marginally over this period. And the nice thing about this program is that it enables the repayment of that solar system to be tied to the property rather than the homeowner who's making the purchase. So if you're a homeowner that's decided to add a solar system, you've gotten funding through SEEP to help cover the initial upfront costs of the project, and then you end up maybe 6, 7, 8 years down the line wanting to move to a new home, rather than having a secondary loan that you're obligated to pay off, you're able to simply sell that home, and that loan will continue to be repaid by the new homeowner for the term that was agreed upon. Now, when we're looking at the return on investment calculation for a solar system, there are a few factors that really play into how much value you're going to see for your investment. So obviously, the biggest primary driver of this is your current utility bills and usage. Essentially, we need to look first at how much energy are you using and what are the costs related to that. The next biggest piece would be looking at the roof itself. Much like a thumbprint, every roof is very unique. Those roofs that have a south facing are generally the most viable. However, as the technology continues to improve, east-west facings also provide a pretty strong return on investment. Other considerations include the complexity of the install cost, as well as potential current incentives such as grant programs, as well as the potential eligibility for additional revenue streams, including solar clubs and carbon credits, which we'll dive into a bit later. Now, before we proceed, I do want to play a quick video that's going to dive into a little bit more of what happens to your energy bills when you do opt into a solar system. One moment, please. All right. We're going to play this from the top.
Here's an electric bill. How will it change with solar? Here's a bill after installing a small solar system. Let's go over the main charges so you can see what you pay and how it would be affected with the solar system. Every bill has two sections charged by two separate companies. The electric retailer is who you buy your power from, which could be either NMAX, Direct Energy, ATCO, etc. The wire service provider is a monopoly that owns the electric wires. These are who approves a solar system size. So sections highlighted in red are the ones that will change with solar. Let's start with the retailer charges. So solar panels produce electricity on the roof. It always feeds the home first, avoiding all transmission, distribution, and energy charges for the power used in your home. Anything excessive will always be sold at the same rate that you buy power at. Your meter will be replaced by bidirectional that can take in power and send power back to the grid. It will spin backwards every time a kilowatt is sent to the grid, and this will appear as a microgeneration credit on your bill. How it will look like after solar with your retailer charges is that the energy charge will decrease larger than the microgeneration credit you generate. And this is to your benefit, as every time you pull a kilowatt of electricity, you also bring in some transmission and distribution fees, which every time you use power in your house would not be present. The next thing I'll bring up is transmission and distribution charges because of how large they are as a portion of the bill and how they would be affected with solar. The rates and fees on the second part of your bill under delivery charges come from the wire service provider. The wire service provider depends on the area that you're in. For most of southern Alberta, that would be Fortis, and in the city of Calgary, it is NMAX. So the two main charges from the wire service provider are transmission and distribution. So I will tell you how that would change with solar. With transmission, it is a fee for using the long transmission lines that carry power from a generator to your neighborhood. Now, that is completely variable by usage. So as you use less electricity, these ones will go down correspondingly. The distribution is a fee for using the specific power lines running to your home. There is a fixed component of around $15 a month on average that would not change. The rest is completely dependent on usage. Things like the administration charge and municipal fees and rate riders would not change on the bill.
All right, perfect. So I hope that provided a bit more insight into the specifics around how billing works and credits work here in Alberta. I'm just going to share my screen again here, and we'll get back up and running. Please bear with me, my computer's being a bit slow today. All right. So now that we've dived into how we calculate ROI a little bit more on our end as a solar provider, I'm going to hand it over to Brett, who's going to talk a bit more about the increasing cost of electricity, as well as some specific use cases that we can showcase the ROI for different homes that we've worked on in the past.
Thank you, Drake. Yeah, this graph here is just kind of giving kind of a quick snapshot into the variability of power prices, tracking back over essentially the last 25 years. So this has really been one of the driving pieces of what's kind of really driven solar adoption over the last particularly 5 years. Alberta has gone through a really major shift in terms of how we generate electricity for our grid. So up until about 3 years ago, about half of the power that we were using in our homes and businesses in Alberta was generated by coal-fired generation plants. Effectively, all of those were decommissioned, and that's kind of where you see that massive spike on that red line between 2020 and 2024. Was that massive shift in terms of lots of generation coming offline at the same time where Alberta's been going through a massive growth curve in population. So the laws of supply and demand really drove prices up to some pretty historic highs over those last few years. And the investment in solar is really driven based on how much are you going to save on an average energy bill. And if that average energy bill has doubled or tripled, it really brings down those ROI calculations by substantial amounts. So we've seen the ROI increase in direct proportion to where power pricing has gone, and that's really been driven upwards over the last few years. I'm just going to go through a few different potential payback scenarios for you guys to kind of get a sense of what actually plays into an individual home's payback. So this is the first one. It's a 7.3 kilowatt system. It features 18 panels that are essentially distributed between the south-facing roof and the east and west-facing roof. You can kind of see that color coordination between the really bright yellows, the nice oranges, and then the kind of darker maroon reds. Those are all essentially a color coordination of how much generative potential that part of the roof has. So as Drake was mentioning before, homeowners that have really nice south exposure typically see the fastest return on investment. East and west is still very much viable. But as you get towards the northern face, the sun exposure just drops off quite substantially, and then the generation drops off as well. So this is kind of what we consider to be a mid-level generative potential, where you have really good and then some kind of moderate generations that they're using for this design. So to kind of bring it down to the actual dollars and cents of this, so this is somebody who was really experiencing some of those sort of rate highs back in probably 2023 is my guess. So they were sitting at a rate of 28 cents per kilowatt hour on the retail charges. And then they're all in cost after those transmission and distribution fees that our video kind of explained. They were sitting at 38 cents a kilowatt hour for delivered energy. Based on that projection, the system they installed was basically set up to save them just under $60,000 over the 25-year warranty time frame of a system. So that's a big part of this as well, is we really talk about lifetime savings based on the actual warranted life of these solar panels. The reality, solar panels don't really die at the end of their warranty. They're actually still about 87% as effective as they were the first year they were installed. So they still have quite a bit of lifespan beyond their warranty. But for the sake of giving people really, really bankable calculations, we just use that warranty time frame to explain lifetime savings. So in this case, almost $60,000. For them, the actual cash outlay for them was about $15,000 to pay for the system. They were going to be experiencing right off the bat about $160 a month in monthly savings. And based on that, they were sitting on a payback period of just over 7 years. All right, here's another scenario. So this is an 11.48 kilowatt system. So this is a bit of a larger system for average. This is definitely going to be a bigger home with higher power demand. And again, these are fully south-facing panels in this case, but this is likely in an inner city community in Calgary where they're likely going to have much larger mature trees that are going to cast a lot more shadow on those areas of roof. So the software that we use will actually take into account how much that's going to affect the production. And that's where you see, even though it being a direct south-facing roof, kind of those cooler colors being present, meaning that the generative potential is restricted by the shading around the area. So in this case, when the client signed up, the utility rate they were experiencing at the time was very different than that previous example. They were sitting at an 8 cent per kilowatt hour rate with a combined transmission distribution charge of 20 cents. So their total all-in cost would have been 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's where you're going to see a very different lifetime savings. So even though this system is much larger than the previous system, based on that utility rate being much lower, their lifetime system savings is projected at $33,000, so almost half of what that previous scenario was. And again, the project cost is much higher because the amount of panels present is much higher as well. In their case, you're going to be saving about $123 a month with an expected payback period of 13 years. So this is kind of more in the lower to moderate payback scenario. All right, and this is kind of our third scenario. This is where we would kind of see a project starting to kind of push towards being more challenging to justify in terms of the economics. So in this case, again, they're kind of exploiting southern facing orientation, a little bit of west facing orientation. But the big challenge for them is this house is actually on a slope downward where they have a much taller home directly to the south of them, and they are also covered with lots of mature trees. So that is having a very direct effect on the productive potential of the solar panels, as you can kind of see in those color coordinated shading factors, become more of that dark purple, meaning it's very low potential generation. So in this case, there is still lifetime savings in the project. They'd be saving a little bit over $2,000, so $2,400 after they've recovered that initial investment. Initial investment in this case being $16,046. This will reap them about a $41.91 per month savings, putting that payback period up to 22.57 years. That's where effectively the break even is just before the warranty of the system ends. So this is kind of where you're seeing a bit of a less than ideal economic payback.
Thank you for that, Brett. So again, going back to what we talked about earlier in relation to how solar will actually affect the utility bills. Again, currently you can see with this diagram, for most homeowners, they're drawing directly from the grid. So what does that mean? The power is being generated at a plant. It is transferring through a wire service provider into the home. The home is then equipped with a meter, which is measuring the draw off the grid for power demand based on the utilities present in the home. Now, when you're adding solar, what this means is that solar production is actually going to be feeding back into the grid, generating a credit for you that can be applied against your wider energy bill. A key consideration here is that for any energy produced at the time, it's going to be utilized within the home first before being fed back to the grid. So you might see people that adopt a solar system attempting to change habits around how they consume their power. For example, running utilities like their dishwasher and laundry during the daytime to maximize the utility of the system. Now, I know I touched on this a little bit earlier, but one key thing that solar does enable you to do is participate in what are known as solar clubs. Solar clubs effectively are third parties that enable you to sell energy to them generated by your solar system at a premium during high production months. So if we look here at the graph, you'll notice starting in about April, you're generally going to start to see your production outstripping your energy usage as there is more daylight hours available. This will run through until about early autumn, say September, October, depending on your specific energy needs. So during this period, people will opt in. They'll be able to sell that energy back to the grid at a premium rate of, in this case, 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Once the production starts to dip down below the consumption, you can then switch over to the low winter rate, in which case we're looking at a rate of about 8.49 cents per kilowatt hour. We do see people leveraging solar clubs are able to generate quite a substantial credit base, certainly enough to cover their energy consumption during those off-peak months in the winter, and in some cases even aspects of their gas utility bill should they be shared by the same provider. Now, let's look at a few net billing scenarios and just get an idea of how this is actually impacting the bills for people that have adopted solar. So in this case, we've got a 4.13 kilowatt system that's forecasted to produce about 4,500 kilowatt hours annually. Now, before adding solar, we could see here they're being charged around $90 a month. Now, once they actually moved over to going solar and using a solar club, what you can notice is for the current month, they were charged they were credited $84.90. And like I was touching on a bit earlier, they're also building that credit bank, which in the case of this user, they had accumulated a credit bank of $415.58. And this is for their billing period at the end of September. So they're really going to be heading into that winter low production season with quite a strong buffer against their upcoming utility charges for those off-peak months. looking at another net billing scenario. In this case, we've got a 10.25 kilowatt system with an annualized energy production estimation of around 9,400 kilowatt hours. So in this case, again, we're seeing an energy bill pre-solar around $83.28. In this case, they were being charged about a 6.79 cents per kilowatt hour just for the energy. Now, when we look at what their bill looks like after going solar and utilizing a solar club, we're seeing that in the same comparable month, they actually generated a credit of $122.47. This is as of June 15th, 2022. And even that early on in the season, you can see the cumulative credit that they'd established in the same period year over year was $264.15. So we could expect that for this user, they were going to have quite the credit bank once you got into the end of September, early October, as they probably transitioned back off onto their off winter or the off solar rate. Brett, do you want to jump in here and speak to the solar offsets and the carbon credits?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So beyond kind of what Drake is touching on, which is again using the solar clubs to really essentially get to that point of a zero billing year, one of the other nice benefits of solar from an economic point of view is the ability to sell carbon offsets. So this is essentially based on Alberta's specific carbon market, where large-scale polluters have to buy carbon credits in order to stay compliant with regulations. So the nice thing is homeowners in Alberta are able to actually bundle these credits together with some of their neighbors in order to sell it back to companies like Suncor and bigger companies that are affected by the tier regulations. So this is always very much based on the system production, but we do see kind of general revenue streams going anywhere from about $3,000 to $5,000 over the first 10-year term, just in carbon offset sales. So we do find that actually makes the payback period drop by a couple of years in a lot of our projects, just based on selling those carbon credits. And it's a very easy, very passive source of income.
All right. So now we've kind of run through high level what the economic and regulatory landscape looks like as it relates to solar for residential homeowners. If you do have any questions for anyone that's attending the webinar currently, please do let us know. And again, if you're watching this as a recording, please reach out to me directly at Drake, that's DRAKE, at solaryyc.ca. Thank you.
Awesome. That was amazing. I loved the real world scenarios that we just ran through. I think that that's super valuable. So again, if anybody playing this back has questions, feel free to reach out directly to Drake. If you didn't catch that, you can reach out to Urban Haven Group and we will put you in contact.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Is recording done?